All right, well, it's very good to be here again with you. It's been a little bit, I guess probably 4 or 5 months ago is when I met you at, we were on a panel together that Lindsay Hansen Park put together. And what a great opportunity I had, and I just was really impressed by you. And this is a podcast that highlights exceptional people, and your story and just kind of what you've been able to do the last couple of years is so exceptional and so needed in today's environment and in today's world where people are choosing so strongly to live on one side or another of every single issue. And you've really found a spot in the middle that I think revolves around love. And that's why I think that you are such an exceptional person and doing an exceptional thing, Richard. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Jimmy. Glad to be here.
So for those that haven't ever listened, you have your own podcast. It's called Listen, Learn, and Love.
Yes.
And you essentially have really spent a lot of time last week. You were formerly an LDS bishop.
Right.
And if you're listening to this podcast, by the way, we typically don't get into religious subjects very often, but whether you're religious or not, whether you're Mormon or not, whether you live in Utah or not, there's going to be a lot of principles that really resonated with me and that resonate with anybody on how we should treat each other when we come from different backgrounds or different beliefs. And I think you're going to get a lot out of this no matter what. So I hope so. But if you just hate religious talk, go ahead and go to the next episode, I guess. And so I guess when I listened to you the first time, what you've been able to do the last couple of years is really create a safe place for the LGBT community to have a voice and to be able to feel safe. And so I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that. As a former bishop, how did you get to the spot where you were raised because, in the past, beliefs around, basically Mormon beliefs, especially being a bishop around homosexuals and gay and lesbian, people and things like that, was very frowned upon, essentially. Even by society in whole, up until about 10 or 15 years ago, it's changed a lot now. So how did you get to the spot where you're at now, where you are this voice, where you're being sought after every day now by different, gay and lesbian teens and young people in the church?
Good question. I was a singles ward bishop over a congregation, obviously, of single people from 2013 to 2016. And in our congregation were a few LGBTQ people. And as I met with them one-on-one, it was the first time I really spent time with LGBTQ people. And after a while of listening to them, I realized that straight people had told me to feel about LGBTQ people my whole life. And I realized that I needed to do what I call a hard drive reset. And I didn't know what amount of homophobia had kind of innocently been picked up in me from society. I sort of say I can take a cholesterol test. I'm 57, Jimmy. I actually have to think about that. And I can take a cholesterol test and get a really good number of where I am, but it's really hard to take a homophobia test and understand how much homophobia is. So I said, I just wipe my hard drive clean, because I don't know what's in there that's good or not, and I'm just going to go meet with LGBTQ people and let them program me the way I think God sees them, by meeting with them. And I realized the trap of unearned opinions, this concept that it's easy to have opinions about things. That's easy, but it's harder to sort of say, I don't have an opinion, or I don't know, and I'm going to go meet with a very group of people who I might quickly have an opinion about and generate opinion by actually meeting with them and understanding. So then I proactively started to go meet with LGBTQ people. There was a guy from my high school who was in a same-sex marriage, and I thought, I'm just going to go to dinner with Doug and his husband Rob, and I'm just going to listen to them. And it was really fascinating for me just to see their careers, what they were doing in society, and how they were giving back. And I didn't feel threatened. My straight marriage didn't feel threatened by just meeting with someone in a same-sex marriage. Yeah, they're living outside the circle of the doctrine of the church I believe in, but they're not living out of the circle of humanity and goodness. And I look at them as my fellow brothers doing what they think is the best road for them in their life, and I honor them. So to answer your question, that's kind of how it started. And then I started to post just some kind things about LGBTQ people on social media, and then more and more people just wanted to meet and share their story.
Well, I think something that's unique about it, I don't know if you've ever read the book Braving the Wilderness by Brene Brown.
I love that book.
She talks about it's very difficult not to love somebody when you lean in and you actually get to know them a little bit. And I think that's what you did so well, is you spent the time and the effort to lean in, right? That uncomfortability, because it is true. I mean, growing up, and we have a sheltered bubble here in Utah, and whether that's with certain minority groups or with LGBTQ as well. And it is interesting that as anybody that you get to know their story and you get to actually associate with them, and you feel like the pain that is sometimes behind some of the things that you yourself were doing. It's like you said, you don't even know how much you've been wired to be homophobic or to have these beliefs against them, essentially. And so I guess that's the remarkable thing about, Brené's book is really that ability to lean into something and to get to know something on that level.
That book has been really helpful for me. I wish I'd read that the week I became a bishop, Jimmy, because I think it's helpful for bishops to have tools from lots of different areas, and that the social science expertise that Brené brings to the table is very helpful to understand what's going on with people and why people can feel marginalized within whatever group they are in. So I found that very helpful, and I found listening to people is just so critical. I think as a bishop, sometimes we're wired to be fix-it, we're wired to solve everything, we're wired to, we kind of have this visual of men behind the pulpit, and that's kind of maybe what we think men do in the church. But I think a lot of good we can do is just by listening to people. We can heal a lot of people by just listening to them. We can give them a lot of hope by just listening to them and validating how they feel. I've learned that it's really important for me to validate people how they feel. And if they're uncomfortable with some parts of Mormonism or whatever the sort of journey they're on, is to validate that and to honor that. And it doesn't then create more of a wedge between them and the beliefs that I believe in by validating how they feel. I think that's what Christ did. I think that's part of his ministry, is to meet people where they are and walk with them.
Well, and one of the things that you talked about too is when you started posting about different, positive messages towards LGBTQ in general, you had a lot of people reaching out to you. Did you notice that opened up an avenue for straight people as well to kind of trust you or kind of have faith that they could come to you?
Great question, Jimmy. So I was assigned, I live in an area of Salt Lake City that's pretty homogeneous, except for high school actually is an exception to that. But generally I live in an area that's pretty homogeneous. I was assigned to an area of Salt Lake City that's in a real tough economic area. And I then, because my kids taught me social media, I started to add everybody in the congregation, whether they were coming to the congregation or not. And gradually enough of those people on Twitter or Facebook accepted and were connected with me. And then that's a 3-year assignment to be a singles ward bishop. But in the last year, I started to post kind things about LGBTQ people. I had no idea the impact it would be on our congregation. The active straight kids knew they could talk to me about anything and everything. And then this group, 2/3 weren't coming to church. A lot of those said, well, I'm not sure I'm going to go attend the congregation, but I know I can talk to this guy. And I know that he can walk with me where I am about my real complicated stuff. And so I had 2 streams of YSAs, young single adults that were meeting with me. Jimmy, the active kids that would kind of get on my calendar through what's called an executive secretary, someone that handles my calendar. Then I had this other stream, I call them the social media kids, that I'd worked directly with. We had a shared Google calendar. So I had these 2 streams of kids being 19 to 31, that would talk to me, and it was just honored. And it was very, very helpful for me as I listened to those outside of active Mormonism to understand why and understand, what had happened and some of the simple narrative I had adopted and why people stepped away when I listened to their stories. I realized that some of that came from the limitations of our church and sometimes the mistakes we make or the pain we can generate. And so this simple narrative that people step away from because they're weak isn't true.
Yeah,
we have some of the very best people I know that have stepped away for reasons that I sort of understand why that happened for them.
Yeah, I've never really liked the narrative that I think a lot of times people believe that people leave the LDS church because they want to sin. I don't think anybody that I know of that's stepped away. I think what happens more so is, unfortunately, there's a culture that it's very difficult once you have sinned to be able to come back. There's a shame culture and some things like that. And I think it's almost difficult. I know, like, with a lot of my friends and things like that, unfortunately, if you have an experience at a young age where, let's say, a young woman or young girl is, she's out on a date and ends up doing something with a guy that she's been taught her whole life is the second worst thing you can do next
Right.
to killing somebody. I mean, that's a lot of pressure, right? And she starts feeling the shame, and she comes back and if she doesn't feel that acceptance, well, it makes it very difficult to find your place again and to find your worth. And so how did you do that, or how do you navigate helping? Because I really, more than anything, I just love the way that you are able to help people wherever you are be able to, and kind of like, you hear the church message, wherever you are, be the best version of yourself that you can be. But how do you help people that have felt that way, or how did you help people, I guess, as a bishop, to get that self-worth back? And
boy, you talk about really important things, because we are not meant to be perfect. God sent us here and he knew we'd make mistakes. So how we handle that and how we as leaders handle that is really critical. And a couple things that I really believe strongly in. Brene Brown taught me that the idea that if I make a mistake, I am not bad. I am good, but I made a mistake. So shame says I am bad. But shame says I am bad versus I made a mistake. And so I think we need to separate our core goodness, that Heavenly Father loves us as his children, from any mistakes we made. We were meant to make mistakes. We don't really have a conference talk that says make mistakes, but the whole plan is set up that if we make mistakes, that we have a way to become clean. But the culture often makes us feel like we're never able to be the same as if we were, because we believe, especially with sexual sin, that we're different permanently. And we've created some of these visual metaphors that are really unfortunate, where a nail into the wood and we pull out the nail, but there's still this hole. And I call that pink Mormon thinking. I think Isaiah teaches that though our sins be as scarlet, they be as white as snow. White means there's no nail hole. But a lot of Mormons think, well, with a lot of forgiving on my part, and a lot of repenting on my part, a lot of forgiving from Heavenly Father in Christ, that I can get all the way from red to a light shade of pink, but they're pink, and they forever think they're different. And if they've had sex, then they think that they're forever. They don't attach virtue, which is who they are. Virtue's too close tidily to virginity, and some people are not virgins when they get married, but they should be feel just as worthy and whole as everybody else because of their core virtues. So I think pink Mormon thinking is a part of our culture, and we need to look at ourselves. And then if we're pink Mormon, we think, well, I'm not as good enough as that person. I'm not good enough to date him, or I'm not good enough to have that calling, or they feel forever different in Mormon culture, and it undersells what Christ wanted to do in the atonement.
They tie a lot of their self-worth to those church principles, right? A lot of times. And so when you feel like you can't get that back, you feel that loss of self-worth. I had a bishop one time, I'll just, tell back when I was going to the singles ward, and I don't know, 7-8 years ago, and I was dating a young woman, and, we kept doing things that were quote unquote mistakes in the church culture or whatever. And it happened, and I mean, let's be honest, you're a 26-year-old guy, you're trying your best, and I didn't have sex with her, but I was definitely, doing things that I felt I needed to go talk to the bishop. And I went in, I talked to the bishop, and he was one of those bishops that would just want to teach and preach and pull the scriptures out, pull out miracle forgiveness, which that book should be burned and banished forever, in my opinion. But, and you leave there feeling like horrible about yourself, but then you go back and you still like the young woman you're with, and it happened again. And I remember the third time it happened, I kept going in because I wanted to immediately get it taken care of. I mean, I really cared,
Guts to go in.
Totally. Well, that's the worst part about it, is you're going in, you're trying to just really do these things. And the third time I went in, he just looked at me and he took his glasses off and he said, "God will not be mocked."
Wow.
And I was like, oh man. And I ended up, getting suspended, or I don't know what the word is, what's a disfellowship, for 14 months.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, I had roommates that were having sex, and they'd go to the bishop, a different bishop or something, and because singles ward, you kind of go where you want. But anyway, and I just remember that being this traumatizing thing for me. I was like, wow, I really didn't do anything bad. The last thing I got the disfellowship for, it was almost like, I swear he didn't believe me, and I really hadn't done more. We were in a hot tub and her clothes were off, but I didn't have sex with her, and I don't think he ever believed me. And so I was like, whatever, it doesn't even matter now. But I guess that I felt it personally, right? I felt that shame that you're sitting there in church. I remember one time, because he told me once I was disfellowship, you're not allowed to speak in church. And I had a funny comment one time, and sometimes I can't help myself. I think of something funny and I want to say it. And so I said it in class and everybody's laughing. And he came up from behind and he put his hand on my shoulder. He goes, let's not forget you're not allowed to speak while you're here. And I was just like, oh man, all right. But I guess that's what I'm saying is one of my missions, you know, and I believe that my whole mission in life now, it's not about black and white Mormonism. It's not. Everything's great to me. And I've kind of started sharing this with people a little bit more, but I love my heritage. I love the culture of what I was raised in for what it was, but the culture of shame, I just want to eliminate it. I want to get it out because I know how damaging it can be, having personally been there, and then staying single into your 30s, you experience it a lot, right? So how do you help people that are in the church that I don't think they necessarily mean bad? I think sometimes they just don't know what that shame does or what shaming does to other people. So how do you help people see that differently and get to a better spot with how they treat it?
Well, first thought is courage of you to go talk to the bishop about this stuff. That takes courage, and sometimes those conversations are difficult, and you've had some difficult ones, and I think we both know that your bishop was trying to do the best he could, but I think we recognize that was not in ways as helpful for you as it possibly could have been. And I admire you going back and trying to hang in there.
It was just like one of those things you walk out, you're like, okay, you know, I won't go into that, but I've had 10 bishops, 8 of them are amazing. I haven't talked to one in 5 years. My last bishop's interview.
This counts, Jimmy.
My last bishop's interview I went into, I just told him, I said, look, according to you, we need to talk, but we don't. I have a life coach. I've never been happier. I feel like I'm doing things my way, the right way. And if this is a safe place to come, then I'll come. If I need to talk to you, you'll never see me. And he goes, just come when you want. Don't tell me a word.
That's good.
He got it, yeah.
So I think to answer your question, I tweeted out one day, everybody needs to leave the bishop office feeling better. And because I think I look at Christ and what he did, and everybody, I think, left Christ feeling better. I think the greatest example of his ministry is that he taught people how to treat each other. And if people have the courage to walk into a bishop's office, I think my respect for people coming and telling me about the stuff they messed up would always go up. Because of the courage it took. And if a woman came and talked about sexual sin, in the back of my mind, I'm just thinking the courage this took to just talk to me. And I want to look them in the eye and I want to tell them the courage it took and that my respect for them only goes up. And then I would sort of say, I'm on your road to help you. What can we do together to overcome this? And I always felt the goal of repentance is godly sorrow and change of heart. It's really simple to me. And so you want to get to someone to godly sorrow and change of heart, and then we talk about the things that are available to them to get them to godly sorrow and change of heart. And it's not like this customized list that you give the same thing to everybody. I think you have to work really well with the person, understand, what's going to work for them to get them to godly sorrow and change of heart. And for some people it's reading a lot of stuff. Some people don't like to read, so I think you have to really go by the Spirit, but I've always felt my goal was to get on someone's road and then walk with them with sort of unagenda results. I just wanted to help them get where they wanted to go. And most people I met with wanted to fully engage in Mormonism and get clean if it's a repentant situation. And my goal is to facilitate that and help them. I remember one young man telling me he was gay. He went and told his bishop. This didn't happen to me. It was another experience. He said, I told the bishop I kissed my boyfriend, and he just looked away in disgust. And he said, that's the last time I've ever been to a bishop's office. So I think we have to sort of train ourselves to just, even if something maybe is a little unsettling to us, we just got to look people in the eye. I remember lots of men working on pornography say, my last bishop, most experiences were great. 90% are good, but a couple of them would just say, man, he just looked away in disgust. And I just felt shame is the word you're using appropriately here, Jimmy. We have to help everybody feel like they're a son or daughter of God. And that they are good, but what they're doing is the thing that needs to be corrected. But fundamentally, they're good, and they need to look in the mirror and see themselves as a son or daughter of God and not the mistakes they're working on. I think mortality, even though we don't want people to make mistakes, the part of going through the mistakes gives us the Christ-like attributes we need. It brings more empathy into our lives. It brings more humility. it can often connect us further with God and His Son. So I think part of mortality, and I think God set it up so most of the messing up happens when you're younger, so that you would have the refining of that to make you a better person for the rest of your life.
No, I think that's great advice for anybody that is going through a situation like that. So let me ask you, as a bishop, that you have these LGBTQ coming in, how did you reconcile, I guess, is it because the church is basically saying this is sin, but I believe the majority of people that are gay or lesbian are born that way. I don't think all, but I think the majority. I do believe in we are physiologically wired a certain way, and I don't think you can change that. I think that's kind of the message even the church gives now, is like they accept that you're born gay, I think, and maybe not, but I think most people accept that. How did you reconcile somebody that's coming in that's dealing with that and maybe feeling shamed over just how they feel versus actual sin? And how did you navigate that where the church is giving one message, but you represent the church as their ecclesiastical leader?
Good question. So the church teaches, and we have put together a website called listenlearnandlove.org, which is meant to be a Mormon LGBTQ youth center, resource center. It's not affiliated with the church, but the church does teach that sexual orientation is not a choice. And so, that is a change from perhaps 10, 20 years ago. The church doesn't teach that anybody can change their sexual orientation. So I think that's really important that anybody on this podcast understands, and that is a change. So let me just be clear, as you correctly articulated, the church teaches that sexual orientation is not a choice. They don't try to even explain. There's no sort of backstory. As I've talked to hundreds of people that are LGBTQ, there's no consistent backstory. It's not like everybody kind of wants to find a backstory. The backstory is that God just set up the world that 4 to 6% of His children are LGBTQ. I just think that was part of His plan.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that sounds about right, but I don't know percentages. But it just seems like certain people are wired a certain way, whereas I'm wired to be a little bit more erratic. They're wired to be maybe a little bit more feminine if they're men. Right?
And I think, I love this, and so I think that's really important. I believe very much that everybody still has the choice of what to do in their life. So I invite every LGBTQ person I meet to follow the teachings of our church. I believe in our church. I believe it's the restored church, and I believe in it. I'm a temple worker and serve in my stake. For LGBTQ people and anybody, I invite them, if they're considering a path not consistent with the church, to get on their knees and pray and ask God what the right path for them is. I meet people who are going into same-sex marriages that believe that's their right path for them. It's outside the circle of my doctrine, but it's not outside the circle of my ability to say, I will support them in what decision they feel is right. Right. And I will be as excited for a gay wedding as a straight wedding. The straight wedding's within my doctrine, and but the gay wedding's within my circle of humanity.
Do you believe there is some people in the church shouldn't try to live the mainstream message?
I don't give general sort of recommendation. I think it's just really personal. For LGBTQ people, there's a few roads. If they're, the church does not encourage a gay man to go into a straight marriage. That was something the church once encouraged men to do, and I guess women to do, to go into a mixed orientation marriage. The church doesn't teach that. I think someone needs to be really thoughtful and understand their sexual orientation. Someone introduced me to Kinsey scale, which is 1 to 6 scale. And so some people are a full 6 or 1, which is homosexual or heterosexual. But a lot of people are bisexual. Not a lot, but within that 4 to 6. Somewhere in between, sure. And so I think if people understand where they are from a real smart analytical standpoint, they will make a more thoughtful decision. So a bisexual person can probably get into a heterosexual marriage and be okay. But I think, but a standard recommendation for everybody is not what I would recommend. I know lots of celibate gay people that are still in the church and it works for them. It's a tougher road. I know about 70% of the gay LDS people by the age of 30 have stepped away from the church.
Why would somebody that's full gay want to stay in a church that doesn't necessarily accept them?
And one of our podcasts talks about a young man or a guy in his 30s that's staying, and he just believes it's the right path for him. He believes in the church. He feels strength in the church. He feels like he's very open. He moved into a singles ward, and one at the bottom of the form says, "What should we know about you?" And he says, "I am gay." And so his mission is, he's very comfortable with who he is. He's out. Everybody knows he's gay, not in an activist way, but a lot of gay people need to be out so people just accept them for who they are. So for him to be loved and accepted and supported within a Mormon congregation for who he is much more healing for him than to be closeted and wondering if people will accept him. So that is the path for him, and it works for him, and it seems to be a path for others. But everybody I know that's LGBTQ is really careful not to prescribe their path to others. So he would be very careful to say this is the right path for everybody.
I think in general that's great advice, is I know for myself, once I took away my expectations of what my life should look like or what it needed to look like based on my cultural wiring, I guess you could say, I just felt a different kind of happiness. A lot less things seemed to go wrong, because what I was perceiving as going bad or wrong in my own life was just my life was not meant to go the path that others had told me that it should. And once I got my head wrapped around that, I was much more, I guess, fulfilled and happy just in my own skin.
Yeah, and so I love that. I love that you've got doing great things and there's great beauty. I've sort of got to this point where if God is fine with 99% of his children not being in Mormonism, then I am too.
Sure.
And he must have a bigger plan for all of his children. So now I want all the world religions to succeed that are actually helping people be better. I want everybody in their individual life to find their own way in a thoughtful, helpful, healthy way, like you and many others are doing. And I support people. And I do that even though I believe deeply in my church. So I've had the chance to baptize about 3 people in the last couple of years that were looking for something in their life, and this ended up being the right path for them. I was working with another young man who he did everything I asked him to do as far as the traditional things to consider Mormonism, but at the end of the day, he felt really confident that his path was to stay in his own religion. And Jimmy, I just felt impressed to support him. I didn't feel impressed with some backstory of things he didn't do.
Right.
I just honored his decision and felt he's close enough with God and his own sort of assessment of who he is that he chose the right path. And so I've learned to support people in their individual paths and recognize good and beauty in that.
Well, and I think there's a lot of beauty in the idea that to really, like you said, to find the path that works for you, right? I mean, I know so many people try to live a life that doesn't necessarily feel authentic to them or doesn't feel like the path that their heart that they feel that they want to live. And I think that's where a lot of people end up frustrated and have a lot of life of regret. I know the friends of mine that no longer are part of the LDS church that grew up here in Utah or didn't, the ones that really seem to have anger towards the church, because for me it's like I just wanted to find my own path that felt authentic. And when I figured that out, it's not that I still consider myself Mormon just my own way. I just have my own way to do it. And I don't care if you agree with me or not, because I don't care if you ever do what I do. I don't think most people should. I think my path for me works, and I found that, and I found fulfillment in that. It doesn't even mean it's right or wrong. I just think for me, and I reserve the right to change my mind whenever I want.
That's cool.
I could end up going back to full-on Mormonism the way it's taught, or I could end up never going to church again. But in the meanwhile, if this path feels right to me and I'm going about trying to serve and love, it brings happiness into my life. And I think when we get caught up in the black and the white is where a lot of the pain exists, right? Like I used to worry, I literally used to pray for my friends if they were drinking alcohol and really being worried for their lives. And I do think that, like everything, it's gray. There's times when I think it's appropriate. There's times when I definitely don't, based on age and where you're doing, what you're at, how much, all those different things. But I just think for me, I used to pray and was so worried about them, and I didn't even care how they were as a person.
Yeah.
And now it's like, hey, how you doing? Like, what can I do for you? Like, how do you feel? Like, what kind of support do you need? Instead of, are you drinking coffee or are you going to the movies on Sunday? Those things that I used to legitimately worry about my friends for. So I don't know. I think that the more, for me at least, the more I could figure out my own purpose being that of, do things for the right motive of love, it's brought me more happiness. But for you as a bishop, I had just such a fine line you had to walk. And I don't envy the position you were in, but I envy the way that you went about it and that you were able to help so many people. So now that you're no longer a bishop, is your message that much more easy to guide people to do what they feel more authentic to do? Or do you worry about maybe repercussions from the church itself if you go too far?
I feel like my message is the same when I was a bishop and when I'm meeting with people right now. Most people I meet with are people that proactively just want to talk about their situation. Most don't have a bishop in their life. Most aren't connected to Mormonism enough. They just recognize they can have a conversation with me about the difficult things they need to discuss. Those same kind of conversations happen as a bishop, and my goal in both cases is to kind of do what you did, is to have non-agenda relationships where I'm really trying to just get on their road. I have to do a lot of listening, a lot of follow-up questions. There's no prescribing at that point, Jimmy. I really need to take the time to listen to understand where someone is. It takes a lot of discipline. Lots of times I'll take notes as I'm writing, and we'll refer back to those notes, but those notes are often clarifying questions to understand where they are, what they're feeling, and so I can really get an assessment of the road they're on, and then I'm in a position to offer a thoughtful suggestion or two. That sometimes as a bishop that would take multiple interviews even to get to that point, especially with someone way outside of Mormonism or been on a different road than I needed to really figure out where they were. But I've always went back to Christ to answer your question, thought, he would just meet people where they are, and then once he knew where they were, he would be in a better position, in the spirit of trust, offer a thoughtful suggestion or two. So I found, not that I'm manipulative in doing that, but I found once I really got where someone was, then I was an ability to help them. Sometimes that was to help someone fully engage in Mormonism, but there was an LGBTQ guy that I was meeting with, and he was in a same-sex relationship, he was on meth, and we talked about, what can I do, how do you want me to help you? And he said, I'd really like you to help me get off meth. So, that's where we spent our time.
Right.
I didn't see him as a guy in a gay relationship. He was not active if he was active in the church and wanting to fully participate in Mormonism, and have a temple recommended and a calling, that's obviously something we'd have to talk about more. But he would just come to our congregation, sit in the congregation, but all he wanted to do was get off meth. So I just met him where he was. We met often on a Friday afternoon and talked, and he had to get off meth. So I just thought that was my role in his life, is to, unless they're an activist, unless anybody is an activist trying to destroy my church or ruin my family or take away my personal freedoms, but as long as they were wanting to make thoughtful decisions in their life, I just met them where they were and kind of let them set the agenda. But often then, as I connected with them, then I was able, even though it wasn't my just pure agenda, was to bring them into the church.
Well, I think that's, the name of your podcast, Listen, Learn, and Love, right? I think those are such important words. Listen first, because a lot of times, I remember I had a buddy one time, and he had been going through some depression, one of my closest friends in the world. I had no idea. And he started talking, and at the time, like 26 or 25, and I was like, thought I had all the answers, and he's talking, and I start giving advice, and he stops me and goes, Jimmy, I don't need answers. I just need you to listen to me. And I was like, it was so poignant. And I was like, oh man, why am I, I don't know. I don't know what I haven't even understood the situation. It'd be like if you went into your doctor and you start telling him what's wrong, and before you can even get to the symptoms, he starts giving you prescription, you would be you wouldn't care for that prescription because he hasn't listened to learn what really you need, right? And I think, the third part of that is the love, where if your motive is love, I think too often in times we get screwed up where we forget the motive of what we're doing. I always say, like, if you're chastising somebody for anything, right? Well, what's your motive? Are you trying to be right? Are you trying to prove them wrong? Are you trying to embarrass them? Or are you honestly doing it out of love? And do they know that you're doing it out of love? And a lot of times I think it's more of a reflection of where we feel about ourselves is how we treat other people. And so when we're lashing out at other people, we know in our own lives we're not happy with something that we're doing.
I agree with that. It's a great example of your friend. Your friend had the courage to sort of say. I remember connecting with a therapist during my bishop assignment, and she taught me the iceberg concept, which is a really powerful concept. It takes listening. And the iceberg concept is sort of this idea that what's above the waterline, this 10%, is often bad behavior. And what's really going on is what's below the iceberg. And so if I just sort of deal with the bad behavior, so if someone, whatever's going on, often the bad behavior is not really the story here. And I need to listen and ask questions and sort of get to the bottom of the iceberg. Often down there is other stuff that if you're going to solve what the bad behavior above the waterline long term, you've got to address and kind of walk with them down there. Now, if you're clinically trained, which I'm not, that helps. But I think just listening and trying to figure out, for YSAs, there's a lot of stress, anxiety, pressure. So a lot of the messing up that occurring is in some ways coping with all that stuff that's heaped on them. And if they can find other ways to sort of deal with that, sexual sin for women often isn't about sexual sin. It can be, but often, especially women with low self-worth, and it's the only way they know how to feel wanted or loved. And if I just add to their burden with a set, consequences from being sexually active, I may just be doing the exact opposite thing. I've always wondered if the woman taken in adultery, when Christ said, "Go thy way and sin no more," we don't ever talk about who she's in adultery with. We don't ever talk about the male companion. Would he have treated him the same way? But maybe he knew it was the bottom of her iceberg. And maybe he knew much more of a story than any of the rest of us knew that were ready to throw the stone. So I'm not excusing sin. This isn't a shortcut.
No, but I think your point...
But I think we just need to be more thoughtful and listen to sort of understand what's going on. And then we can help people more long-term accomplish the things they need to.
Yeah, I think I saw a video on YouTube or something once, and it was this bully at school, and it's kind of like the movie Wonder in some ways. You see the bully, and he's just beating up the smaller kid, and you're like, oh, he's such a bad person, he's such a bad kid. And he goes home, and his dad's beating the crap out of him. He's just got this world's worst situation, right? It's like we don't know what causes people to act the way they do, and I think we forget that when people are acting poorly towards us sometimes. Well, something that you've been speaking all over the place now, talking about these issues. You got your podcast. You've really kind of gone all in to get this message out there, and I think it's very well received because it's very well needed, especially in Utah, where I think there's a lot of people like you and myself that feel like there is cultural changes we can help make to make this a better environment for everybody to live together. How do you help somebody that's maybe been entrenched in these long-term... Because one thing that bothers me about I just say liberal positions is I don't think they give time for conservative people that have thought a certain way their whole life the necessary time they need to get to a certain spot. Like, it's very difficult to just go from I've been trained and taught my whole life this, and hey, you're wrong, and they get a lot of backlash because it's almost like this moral I'm better than you because I already have this position, and I think they don't give a space for people to get there. And so I don't know, how do you help LGBTQ people have the patience with people that aren't necessarily there? And how do you help, maybe people with more conservative beliefs, maybe to see another side of this a little bit better?
Good question. One of the things that I've done is tried to create boundaries that are not threatening to LDS people. So the organization that we put together, called listenlearnandlove.org, is not an organization asking the church to change. It's not suggesting what the church should do. So we've created, and we're a group of active Mormons. There's an advisory board on our website of active Mormons committed to having a dialogue. But what we want to do is, and I'll read President M. Russell Ballard's quote down at BYU. He said, Mormon leaders, along with rank and file, need to listen to and understand what LGBTQ members are feeling and experiencing. We must do better than we have in the past until all feel they have a spiritual home, a place to worship and serve the Lord. So that's one of the first time a leader of our church has ever said that vocabulary over the pulpit at BYU or General Conference. And so we believe there's a time in the church right now where there's a need to hear our LGBTQ brothers' stories, so we can really... Fiona Gibbons, one of the great leaders and thought leaders in our church, says every Latter-day Saint who wishes to bear one another's burdens must first touch that person's cross to understand the nature and depth of the pain being carried. So it wasn't, Jimmy, until I met with LGBTQ people that I could touch their cross. How am I going to touch their cross? listening to straight people tell me how about LGBTQ people feel? How am I going to touch the cross of a black teenager listening to white teenagers? How am I going to touch the cross of a woman listening to men? So I realized that we have to hear stories, and that's one of our biggest focuses, is having LGBTQ people and their parents on our podcasts and on our website is share their story. And our website is primarily geared to Mormons that are first kind of engaging in this topic so that they can understand that we can both be Mormon and supportive of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. That's my number one message, is that is not a conflict. In fact, that's part of my Mormon baptism covenants. I love where in the Book of Mormon, Alma, one of the prophets in the Book of Mormon, is showing people the waters of Mormon, and he offers a baptism challenge. But instead of going vertical with commandment keeping and a relationship with God, he goes horizontal. And the first part of his baptism challenge talks about how we treat people. And you know this, Jimmy, how we mourn and bear other burdens and comfort. So much of my Mormon belief is my requirement, which is something I love, to help people. And it's easy to help people kind of in my same privileged circle. But Christ didn't start there. He started with the people most on the margins. So part of the thing I've been learning is about privilege. I come from the bullseye of Mormon privilege, Jimmy. I'm sitting here in Salt Lake as a 5th generation Mormon. I'm male. I'm just all the check marks. I'm part of no marginalized group. I'm married. I have 6 kids, reasonably successful business. I don't even have any LGBTQ people close to me, but I feel called to do this. But part of it is because an ally steps in and recognizes there's a gap. And so he or she brings voice to that gap. So I realize because of my privilege, I might have more people listen to me. But what you do with that privilege is so careful. So I need to, for anybody listening to this, anybody in privilege, it's not about me. This isn't about me getting more Facebook friends or more Twitter followers. This is about me being voice to people that have less voice. And I love the last verse of A Bridge Over Troubled Water, because the first 2 voices by Simon and Garfunkel. It's a song that came out when I was in high school.
Yeah, okay.
You probably know it. But the last part of that verse is sort of letting the other person shine, and I'll be right behind you. So part of what we're trying to do is help LGBTQ people shine, and so that people understand their cross. Not that they're marginalized or refugees. They're incredible, wonderful people. I've learned, Jimmy, that I can't become the person God wants me to be by just hanging around straight people. LGBTQ people are teaching me things that no one else has ever taught me about things that Christ taught, and they're helping me be a better person, a better Christian. And I believe our church becomes stronger when we do a better job of finding a place for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. One of the things I talk about is the church's relationship with its LGBTQ members is like a 20-chapter book. And we have more chapters to write because it's not healing and safe for all LGBTQ people, and the facts are many step away. And so we could look inward and just say they're less faithful. That's convenient, but I don't believe that. We need to look, well, we could look outward and just blame it on them, or we can look inward as a restored church and say, we have more chapters to write. And I don't advocate what those chapters are. That's kind of my boundary. I leave that to the leaders I support. And my job, like many others, is support individual people, like Christ did.
Well, I think the most important thing is, like you said, I think one of the issues that we run into in 2018 is marginalizing individuals in the name of groups, right?
Yeah.
So you have like gays and Mormons and Democrats and Republicans, and I think that's part of the problem is when you see people as part of a giant group as opposed to individuals. So I think what you said there, I hope people listening caught that. If you're listening right now and you're kind of thinking to yourself like, well, okay, I would like to feel more of this love and towards all people or whatever else, or maybe you're already doing that, but you're trying to figure out how to extend that to others. I think taking the individual, like you said, that's one of the reasons I love to travel. I love to meet random people. I love it. And
that's cool.
I've met so many random people. I mean, I've been to gay bars in LA, and
that's awesome.
and put yourself in those uncomfortable situations. The first time I remember I ever went to a gay bar, I was, it was very uncomfortable. I was with girls that we were there with, but at the same time, it was like, but then you get there and you realize, oh, okay, each person is an individual, and more you kind of, like the whole thing we talked about at the beginning to bring it full circle is as you lean into anything, you understand like, hey, these are individuals. This is not a grouping. I think you could have the most random beliefs against another person, especially online. This happens a lot where you're so on one side and they're so on the other. If you sit down and have a conversation together, I think 90% of the time you're going to find a medium space where you two are on the same page and you find empathy for the things that you don't agree with, and you're okay not agreeing in those moments.
Yeah, it's hard to not like people up close. There's a Brene Brown thing that you mentioned earlier.
Right.
That is absolutely true. There's fear in meeting people. I was fearful going to dinner with a couple in a same-sex marriage. I was fearful I was crossing a line in my belief. I was fearful that I realized as I just started to see everybody as individual humans, that the beauty of my life now is the circle of my love is extended, and I see good everywhere. ISIS, I don't see good in. They're trying to bomb me and destroy me. So it's not like I don't have any boundaries, but I just see so much good. But I love to, one of the things I like to talk about coming back to LGBTQ is I don't even like to call it a community, because now that's fine for a lot of people, but it almost creates this visual of they're on a different road, they're in a different, physically separated from me. I like to think of that they're my brothers and sisters, they're my Mormons, they're my friends, they're our people, they're our brothers and sisters, sons and daughters. And I start to think if 5% of Mormons are LGBTQ, that's about 780,000. That would fill up BYU Stadium like 13 times, Jimmy.
Wow, that's crazy.
Of LDS LGBTQ people. So that's 2 seasons of home football games, a different LGBTQ person. So these are our people. And so I think, not that communities, a lot of people are fine with that term, so I'm not trying to be too particular about a term, but it's just the point that these are people on my same road of humanity. These are people in my circle. These are people that I think God has brought into my life to help me be a better person. And just like you're saying, I'm a better person by not only being with active Mormons for 3 hours at church, but I'm a better person by being with other wonderful people in my life. And my circle in my life is enhanced by extending my circle and seeing good and beauty. One of the quick stories that my mission president did, and we did a podcast on this, he arrived in England. His name's Ellis Ivory. He's still a business guy in this community. He was in his 30s when he was my mission president. We thought every mission president was in their 30s until we realized that's not. But one of the things he did to change the culture, because the prior mission president was a military guy, and sometimes we create an enemy. So he created an enemy in England, the Church of England. And so that was the enemy. And our mission president, Ellis Ivory, thought, no, the Church of England is not our enemy. So creatively, he found a historic Church of England in Northeast England, and the vicar and him had an all-mission conference. And so we have this mission picture of the entire mission in front of a Church of England. And then our baptism soared. We actually led the church as English-speaking mission because we could just talk about the beauty and truths of our religion on its own merits. We didn't need a bogeyman. We didn't need an enemy. Yeah, we would have a thoughtful discussion at times about our doctrine versus the Church of England, but it didn't need to demonize them.
Sure.
And it was a fundamental, I look about on my life, Jimmy, of where I got, and that was a key part of it, what happened in the mission, and our love for other religions that occurred within that mission. As a story, as a coincidence, Brent Brown from Brent Brown Toyota down in Utah County was one of our missionaries. He went back to that church a couple of years ago, 35 years later. They're doing a fundraiser to save the bell tower. Brent thought, I'm going to help. And so to make a long story short, there was a check presentation from the new mission president for $20,000 given to the new vicar after they actually believed this wasn't a scam. actually showed them the picture of this church with 200 missionaries in front of it. It was just a beautiful story of humanity coming together in our differences as individuals to see good. And so I love those examples, and I think that's a great part of your podcast and your individual mission is to find bridges that bring us together. That's what I love about Brene Brown is, we're really alone if we just stay around people in our own echo chambers in our own world, and we may be more isolated surrounding ourselves with people that exactly believe like us versus engaging in a more thoughtful conversation. go ahead. I'm going to find a tweet when I wanted to quote to you.
No, you're totally good. Well, and by the way, if you don't follow Richard on Twitter, you're you're great at social media. What is your Twitter handle?
It's at Papa Ostler.
That's at Papa Ostler. So we'll attach some links to your podcast, because your podcast really gets into the stories of some of these LGBTQ individuals, and you highlight a lot of their stories, and I think as you start to hear the stories of some of these people, you do start to have a different outlook towards them and a different empathy towards them. You kind of understand a little bit more where they come from.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do, Jimmy, is build bridges and understanding. We're not trying to polarize the world further, and I think most people don't want to be polarized further. Just a quick note, the reason I got into Twitter was my high school kids got me into Twitter, Jimmy. I'm a little old for Twitter. I'm 57.
I think that's why people like you, though. You get a lot more likes and retweets than I ever got.
And Papa Ostler, I got that name because I wanted the kids in high school to know I wasn't just another high school kid. So I wanted to create some boundaries, so that's how the name. But I love this tweet from one of my college-age kids. He's in a different political party than I am.
Sure.
But look at this tweet. Truth is attracted to humility. Right answers follow those who actively seek cognitive dissonance while ignoring the constant call of ego to reassure themselves of their own intelligence. Go find someone who disagrees with you today and just listen. I mean, if I want to have hope in the world, Jimmy, I look at people like you that are younger than me and doing great things, or even the kids that are 10 years younger than you, and I do have great hope in the future of our world. I don't buy into any of the narrative that this generation's less faithful or less good or less connected to God. I think I think some of them are stepping away from organized religion because they look at organized religion and perhaps its inability to fully meet the needs of the most marginalized, so they're kind of stepping into that gap. But I think this is a wonderful generation. It just gives me great hope for the future.
Yeah, no, I agree. I used to worry about it a lot more, and then I coached high school baseball for 3 years. Yeah, over at Bingham High School, and I'd never met.
We've had some good teams.
Well, that's why I went there. If I'm going to coach, I wanted to have a chance to,
Now, Cobham High School, where our kids go,
sure,
they've got a good baseball team
yes,
too.
They do.
But anyway,
yeah, no, but when I started coaching, I thought to myself, these are much better kids than I ever was. I know my nieces and nephews, they're much better kids. Me and my brothers and sisters, we all laugh. We were all hellions compared to them. I mean, even the ones that are the worst are a lot better than we were, as kids. And we all turned out, for what it is, okay, And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that the message needs to be one of hope. And I'm super excited again. Wanted to have you on here. I know Lindsay just invited us both to speak this summer. There's a symposium. We'll attach me and Richard will be speaking on a panel together with a few other people. Brady Williams, who was recently on the podcast, a few other people. But it's basically a panel of people that do Mormonism their own way, come from different backgrounds, but we all have that heritage, I guess, to lean on. So, well, I just appreciate you. It was a pleasure to have you on. If you guys aren't listening to the podcast, go subscribe. Again, that's listen, learn, and love. You can't go wrong learning more about those three things. You can catch a lot more of what Richard is doing here. So thanks again so much for being on.
Thanks, Jimmy. Glad to be here.
All right, appreciate you.